A lot of you were here 3 weeks ago when I talked about the fact of when I was over in Germany and the first group that I had for 45 minutes, all I heard was cussing and swearing, cussing God out, cussing Jesus out. And that whole time, my heart was in pain. Through many of the groups, as I shared, as they're saying, there's no God, and who the heck is God? You're not going to like us, chaplain, because blah, blah, blah. And my heart was in pain. My heart goes in pain when I hear and walk with the struggles that we have with each other at times. And my heart is in pain. My heart gets pained over the issues that I do myself. And I look after the fact and I see it more through God's eyes, the spectacles, as Martin Luther says, the spectacles of Scripture. And I realize I disappointed the Lord, and my heart is in pain. And I think if I'm feeling that pain, and I'm a sinner saved by grace, how much more didn't Jesus, for his 33 years, feel the pain of walking with us and seeing how we just turned from the way so badly? So when the Apostles' Creed says, suffer unto Pontius Pilate, I think his whole 33 years was a period of suffering. Period of pain. We also see here in the garden, when he's in the garden and he says, Father, let this cup pass from me. There is a pain there that he feels in his life. We read from Isaiah, who writes 600 years before Christ come, surely he, talking about the Messiah, will take up our infirmities. He will carry our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. My sin was laid on him. He suffered for me. There was a suffering there. He was crucified, died, and buried. Deuteronomy 21 says that anyone who dies on the cross or on a tree is cursed by God. Christ needed to take our curse away. Paul says in Romans, the wages of sin is death. Christ was crucified, cursed by God on the tree. The wages of our sin he took upon himself as death in his life. He died. The soldiers took the spear and put it through his side. He had so much blood loss. Now I know a lot of you don't like to watch, if you've watched the movie that came out 7-8 years ago, Passion of the Christ. If you haven't seen it, you need to. You may not like me for saying that. You may say, oh, PG, you're crazy. We don't want to see it. But if you want to at least get a small glimpse of the physical anguish that Christ went through, you watch the movie. He suffered under Pontius Pilate. He crucified and he died. Muslims teach that Christ did not die. They teach that it was somebody else that died in the place of Christ. Again, as I said earlier, the Apostles' Creed talks about a lot of heresies that are around the world now and for the last 2,000 years and speaks against them. And it defines what we believe, what I believe as a Christian, that Christ actually died. His heartbeat was gone. The breath was gone from his life. And he was buried. He was buried. For 3 days he was buried. I know there's a lot of arguments of people that say, wait a minute, 3 days? He was buried on Friday evening and he rose Sunday morning. That's only like, if we add it up, it's only like 2 days maybe. Well, we're thinking different than the Jewish people think. You know, they go from the sun up to the sundown. Their time was different. According to the Jewish mindset, he was buried for 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If you're at the hospital and you go in Friday night and you're there Saturday and you leave Sunday morning, you probably get billed for how many days? 3 days. For what, 12 days? Okay, hopefully there's, yeah. Anyway, so you follow what I'm saying. I mean, we argue the date, we argue the hours, but really, we do that today. He was buried for 3 days, and he descended, we say, to hell. Some of you may know this, some may not, if you were brought up in a Methodist church. The Methodist church doesn't add this. And we went through this a couple of weeks ago, and Sherry Butler afterwards says, I don't remember that descend into hell. I was brought up Methodist. We never said that. Well, if you look within the old creeds, most of them talk about descent into hell, but there's some of the translations that don't. This is a discussion that we can have. There's two thoughts with this. There's two thoughts. The one is that when he suffered under Pontius Pilate, he was experiencing hell. When he's in the garden and he says, Father, take this cup from me, he's experiencing hell. When he's up on the cross and he cries, Elah, Elah, lama sabachthani, which says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That is the time that he's experiencing hell. It's a severing of the Trinity relationship that had been there since eternity beginning and eternity end. That's the one concept. The second concept is that the words he descended into hell actually means he descended into hell. Paul says in Ephesians 4, when Jesus ascended on high, he led captives in his train and gave gifts to men and women. What does it mean that he ascended except that he also descended to the lower parts? Jesus, within his ministry at one time, told the parable of the fact you can't go into somebody's home and rob them unless you bind up that homeowner. If the homeowner's home, you got to be stronger than that homeowner and be able to tie them up to rob from them. The Old Testament says, O grave, or New Testament says, O grave, where is thy victory? O death, where is thy sting? That Christ broke the bondage of death. He broke the bondage of sin. So there's those two thoughts there. The descent into hell. Was it that period of time where he is alone from God on the cross and walking through all of his suffering under Pontius Pilate? Or was it actual a descent into hell? We don't know for sure. I know which way I lean, but there was a separation. A separation between the Father and the Son. He was crucified, dead and buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. So we have Christ's humanity, his humiliation, and then he moves into his ascension and within heaven, his glorifications. Again, there's heresies that say once he died, he stayed dead. He was in the grave, that he's still in the grave today. The Apostles' Creed says no. The third day, he rose from the dead. He conquered death. And again, why is it important that Jesus rose from the grave? I'll tell you one thing. If he hadn't rose from the grave, I'm just fooling myself up here this morning. You're all fooling yourselves coming to worship, giving your life over to him, offering your tithes, your 10%, your love gifts over that. We're all fooling ourselves. If he did not rise from the grave, there is no Christianity. But he is the only leader of any of the world religions that claims to have risen from the grave. He's the only leader of all the world's religions that have evidence, biblical and also non-biblical evidence of the grave being empty and the resurrection taking place. Third day he rose again from the dead and he ascended into heaven. A visible ascension. Enoch in the Old Testament, Elisha in the Old Testament ascended into heaven. Jesus Christ, we believe, ascended into heaven, and the last part is that he sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. It's interesting when Stephen, one of the first deacons, was being stoned. Stephen, as he's being stoned, he has the vision, and in Acts chapter 7, we hear his